Hello and welcome to Ward Talk, CTN's look at the political scene in Ann Arbor. I'm your host, Bonnie Gabowitz. We'll be discussing issues and solutions with the City Council members from our 5 wards on the 3rd Wednesday of each month. Joining us is Elizabeth Nelson from Ward 4. Welcome, Elizabeth, and I must tell you I'm delighted to meet you. This is your first time on our show. You're a relatively newcomer for the council, so I'd love to start with just finding a little about you and what brought you to Ann Arbor and what brought you into wanting to be on the council.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. So my husband and I live in Ward 4, obviously. My husband works for Ford Motor Company, and that's really sort of how we ended up in Ann Arbor. Before we lived in Ann Arbor, we actually lived in England for his job, and then we moved back here in 2004. And so I have a law degree. I never practiced, but I also have a teaching certification that I got a few years ago, and I've been teaching a little bit, long-term subbing jobs for people who have like maternity.
Is that elementary or secondary?
Elementary, elementary. And we have 2 boys that are now teenagers, and so I have a son at Pioneer and a son at Slauson, or not Slauson, at Steam. He did go to Slauson. He's finishing up at Steam at Northside.
They grow up so fast, don't they?
Yeah, well, I'm used to saying those 2 schools match together, but yeah, at any rate, so he's going to be going to community next year. And yeah, so I've been following politics since we moved here, and I actually took the newspaper when we first moved here, when we had an everyday newspaper. And
were you always in Ward 4, or did you move around?
We've always lived where we lived. Mm-hmm. In fact, we're living in the first house we ever bought. Yeah, we live by between Pauline and Stadium, but right before Pauline and Stadium connect, and we really like it there. I tell people I think Ward 4 is the best ward. I spent all summer.
You're allowed.
Yeah, I'm allowed to say that. Well, quite honestly, in my campaign, I was mostly biking around. I mean, almost exclusively. I think the only time I used my car was when I had to deliver yard signs. But there are other wards that I think would be more difficult to campaign by bicycle because they're too hilly. Ward 4 is nice and relatively flat.
So were you working during these years? If you weren't in law, were you doing something
So
else?
I passed the Michigan bar, and then shortly after I passed the Michigan bar, we moved to England, and we were there for 4 years. And I had my older son over there, and when we moved back, I really just sort of threw myself into volunteering in the schools and volunteering with various organizations in town. And then I worked part-time at a preschool for a few years before I went back to school and got my certification to teach. And so I've been doing sort of a lot of different things, none of which were a real conventional kind of job, but I've been involved in the community ever since we moved here.
So what inspired you to become a council member, to run? And because, you know, it's a lot of work just to campaign and keep up with all the information. So what got you going?
Well, I think part of it was paying attention to some of the issues and sort of being curious about what I would bring to the office. I mean, I think I had to sort of convince myself that this is something that I'm up to the task, you know, and so some of the issues that I was paying attention to, I realized that it would be helpful to have another person at the table who was trained in law. You know, we had, particularly last year, we had a couple of situations that were real heavy on being able to interpret things and maybe asking city attorneys the right kinds of questions. So
you bring up a good point. It's one thing to have legal counsel, but you need to know what to ask to get the advice that you need.
Right, and
that's a very good point.
Yeah, because I recognize that we clearly do have legal counsel, but it's helpful to have a few extra people around who are sort of thinking about other aspects of the situation and know what to be curious about. So that's kind of why I ran.
And why at this particular time rather than maybe, you know, 4 or 5 years ago? Is there something that was changing in the city that got you more interested in getting involved?
Well, the fiasco, the challenges around the Y lot was what got me interested. And to tell you the truth, this is a stage in my life that it made sense. 4 or 5 years ago, my father was ill, and I was driving back and forth to
You
Chicago.
had family obligations.
Yeah, so now my kids are older, and it's more of a realistic thing to pursue. I have time to pursue this. Right now, I'm working 1 day a week at a preschool, and I'm still trying to fit in a few days a week substituting. It's not working out, honestly, because I am constantly contacted by people who want to meet and want to have conversations, and that's something that's really important to me.
Yeah. And let's talk about your ward now, Ward 4, which happened to be a ward I was telling you I used to live in, and I know that a lot of issues for Ward 4 are also issues for the whole city. But let's just talk specifically about anything particularly special right now going on with Ward 4, what the issues are.
Well, there are a couple things. So I've been to a couple community meetings recently about traffic calming measures. We had recent improvements on Scioto Church, and so the city recently implemented changes at the intersection of Scioto Church and 7th, and the changes at 7th and Stadium are a little more long-standing, but these are changes that community members and people in the neighborhood kind of want to talk about. And so
Now, are they still working on the construction? I know you can now drive on that road, but are they still working to improve parts of that street?
Yes, they're actually they're putting in a path on the north side of the street.
A bicycle path?
Actually, a pedestrian path. They're going to be bicycle lanes on that street, if there aren't already. I actually haven't been down that street very recently, but I do know that they're doing a pedestrian path. And so if you drive down Scioto Church, particularly between Main and 7th, you can see where the path is going to be. And it's going to avoid some trees. It's going to be quite nice. It's going to be a place where you can walk more easily. And some residents on the south side of Scioto Church, on one of the service drives between Chaucer and 7th, they were in the middle of a process working with the city to have traffic calming measures on their stretch.
Now, is it to improve the calming measures, or there weren't any to begin with?
There weren't any to begin with. So the problem...
And that is such a well-traveled road between Pioneer High School and, it's such an important area to get from one part of the shopping area to another.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things that is exciting to me is these opportunities for city staff to work with residents to come up with solutions that are going to help neighborhoods and are going to be agreeable to neighborhoods. So sometimes the city will change something and neighbors don't see it coming, or they don't agree with it, or they're confused and frustrated. I had a lot of conversations this summer with residents who were talking about, why is that turn lane that way, or why did they do that? I have been trying to keep people notified about meetings that I find out about, so that as many residents can participate in conversations with the city about the plans that are coming.
Now, are there any restrictions that you have due to any kind of state or federal laws or guidelines, or in terms of traffic calming, or are you pretty much given carte blanche in deciding where it would go, or how high the speed bumps would be, or whatever?
There are specific regulations, which I learned from city staff. There's a sort of a menu of options that they can present to residents, and one of them is not a stop sign. Apparently, the city can't just unilaterally put a stop sign in. That was explained at the meeting I went to recently. And there are a lot of reasons why they would use one method over another, and basically the residents can participate, and the city has these meetings, consulting with residents and asking them, how would you like us to solve this problem for you? So it's nice.
So what do you see in the future? How long would it take for this to be finalized? Are we talking, let's say, 6 months, a year?
Well, this particular project is a fairly small one. It's like one block. I think it's like one block. Only 10 or 11 houses are affected. And the process was the neighbors had to come together and put together a petition. And I'm not actually sure about the timeline in terms of how long it took them to get through this process, but there's a meeting towards the end of March where they're going to be sort of in the final stages of saying, like, this is the plan, this is what we've agreed to do, and this is how we're going to move forward on it. I presume it's going to happen in the spring when the weather is warm enough.
And just for the minute that we have left before the break, how can a neighbor in your ward find out about these meetings? Do they get email communication if they're signed up, or is it up to them to keep track of when these meetings are?
There are two different ways. So the city website does post these meetings, and you can sign up for notifications about meetings like this. The other thing is that if you live in the vicinity of something happening like this, the city will send you postcards. One of the things that I'm trying to do as a representative is I have a website where I am trying to collect all of these kinds of public meetings and news that's relevant to Ward 4, things that residents might want to participate in, and put them in one place. Because the city website has a huge amount of information, and so sifting through it can be difficult.
Right. Well, when we get back, I do want to talk about your efforts in keeping in touch and informing your constituents. We want to hear from you, so please email questions to ctn@a2gov.org or tweet us at #CTN in Arbor. We're taking a break, and we'll be coming back with more from Ward 4.
In Ann Arbor, we stop for pedestrians at crosswalks. Period. It's the law.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Gabowitz, and this is Ward Talk. We're speaking with Elizabeth Nelson from Ward 4. This is her first time on the show, so I'm delighted to meet her. So let's just continue talking about what you had just talked about, the idea of citizen engagement and being able to get the word out to the citizens as to what's happening and how they can give more input. And we were just talking about the traffic calming and the fact that there were meetings and the city wanted input from the citizens. It's just wonderful that there's so much interest in really hearing from the citizens rather than just the leadership making decisions on their own. So what have you done in particular to try to make it even easier for the people in your neighborhood in Ward 4 to know what's going on and to give their input?
Well, the biggest thing that I'm doing is I have a newsletter, and you can find it on my website at a2gov.org. A2elnel.com. That's A2ELNEL.com. And I put out this newsletter the Sunday before every council meeting. And what I do is, since I have to do it for myself to prepare for the meeting, I just go through every item on the agenda and I write a little description of what it is. And I have in my newsletter, I always give you the link so that you can go to the city website, and if it's something's more interesting to you that you want to know more about, you can click on the link and read all the documents behind it.
I'm definitely going to check that out, because that would really help me follow it. And the website is so involved, the A2Gov.
It is.
Has so much information.
Well, right, and the city website does have a lot of information. It needs to have a lot of information, right? Because it needs to have the information for every issue you might possibly stumble on. And so, and even if you go to the city website to Legistar to look at an agenda, the way it's formatted, you have to sort of click back and forth between different places to see documents and see text. And for our convenience as city council members, they put together a whole packet so that it's all in one place for us.
So you want to make it more user-friendly.
I do, and I also want to create an opportunity for residents to see what's happening ahead of the meeting so that they can reach out to me. So I send my newsletter Sunday morning usually, and then I have coffee hours on Sunday afternoon, and they end up being really excellent conversations because residents come and share perspectives that I wasn't aware of, and we talk about things that are on the agenda, and they share ideas and thoughts with me that I wouldn't have otherwise, and I can go to the meeting a little more informed, not just from the materials, but from my residents.
Well, plus you are definitely representing your neighbors by listening to them and hearing what their questions are. So that sounds all-encompassing and certainly very exciting. And so what do you do with the information? Let's just say citizens say, you know, this is how I'm feeling about something, or this is what I want to be different, or these are my concerns or frustrations. I know the wheels of government go slowly, and sometimes it's hard for people to have to wait for the end result. So how do you then move it forward once you have this exchange of information? How does it help you at the meetings?
Well, sometimes it can go rather quickly, actually. As an example, in a recent meeting, we passed an amendment to a trespass ordinance. And a number of residents reached out to me and said that they found this really concerning. Like, it was confusing the way it was drafted. People wondered, does this mean we're going to be citing people for trespass and like catching people out? Particularly the kind of people who would be caught out for being cited for trespassing are sort of vulnerable residents. And a lot of people reached out to me and said, like, I don't know how I feel about this.
Or maybe the wording was vague?
Well, the wording was actually very specific, but it was hard to because as you know, as just residents, we don't have an understanding about the process that the police and the legal system goes through with the process of trespass. It's hard to understand. Now, something like that, an amendment, has 2 readings. So what happened was, with the first reading, I communicated in my newsletter, I said, you know, a lot of people have reached out about this trespass ordinance, and I have concerns too. I'm wondering about it. I'm worried about the same things you are. And so we talked about it, and I was able to reach out to city staff and get some explanation from our city attorneys. And I talked directly to the chief of police, and he explained things to me, so that then 2 weeks later at the next meeting, when we were reading it a second time, I was able to first explain in my newsletter, like, this is what I learned about it. This is why I'm comfortable with it now. And I was able to talk to
Did they make any changes because of the input you gave?
Well, for me, it wasn't about sort of changing the outcome as far as like sort of educating people about the reasons behind it. So this was a situation where residents didn't really push a different outcome, but the fact that we were having communication back and forth sort of helped everyone's understanding of it. And that was a good thing. I think it's a really good thing when people are informed. There are other situations where I sort of have things on the agenda that I'm hoping to push forward that I feel like residents have communicated to me. I've had a lot of conversations with residents about crosswalks, and I'm eager to sort of take a second look at the rules that we have around the crosswalks to try to increase this level of safety, the communication, between the sort of body language communication between the person who's walking and the person who's driving. This is something that a lot
That's
of people talk
always
to me.
sometimes difficult. I know driving, sometimes I'll see someone at a crosswalk, and I'm trying to figure out, are they waiting for the bus, or do they really want,
And you're
or
not
do
the
they
only,
really want to cross, or are they just standing there thinking about something?
and you're not the only person to tell me that. And the truth is that we could amend our crosswalk law to sort of acknowledge that piece of it. Other ideas that I have are some communities actually regulate use of electronics by a pedestrian that's in the street. That not very many municipalities have done that, but that's sort of an interesting idea to me. I don't know that it's safe to be walking across the street while you're on your phone. Just things to think
But
about.
we don't have any ordinance directly related to that behavior.
We don't.
Yeah.
We don't. And we actually, I'm not sure that we have, our laws are not really targeted to the behavior of the pedestrian. Our ideas now are that cars are heavily regulated. This is the area that we are in the habit of regulating, and the car is the part of the equation that's most dangerous. I'm not going to, while I'm on foot, I'm not going to hurt a car. It's the danger is the car is going to hurt me. And so we've sort of been looking at it in a one-sided way. And the truth is that it kind of doesn't matter which part of the equation is to blame. If one part of the equation can prevent an accident from happening, we should be working at it from all directions. That's kind of the way I see it. So.
Right. And another issue, I was just watching the meeting the other night dealing with the water sewage bills and the fact that the city is revisiting the change in how residents and businesses are charged water because there was some reaction to this new setup. And my taking of this, just watching it for a while, was that it's very complicated. And there were a lot of issues as to really what's fair and how does the city maintain, deal with the expense of it without losing, but also being fair to the citizens and the businesses. If you could in any way elaborate and help us understand what, why it's so complicated and what are they eventually trying to do? Because I know this is taking meetings and questions and answers with the experts. So help me.
Yeah, so what happened was there was a cost of service study last year, and based on that, they drew conclusions about what categories, how categories of users should be divided up and how the cost should be allocated. What we're actually talking about right now is almost exclusively residential, single-family homes. We discussed this, the idea that the second consultant has advised us that we're not, he felt like the cost that had been assigned to multifamily was appropriate, and so that allocation is probably going to remain the same. Most of the debate that we're having now is how to allocate the cost of water for single-family residences. And the controversy with the system that was implemented, 6 months ago, was mostly around the tier system and how extreme the fourth tier was.
And the tiers are based on?
They're based on use, and so it's a disincentive to overuse. If you use a small amount of water, you're paying a very low rate per CCF, and as you move into higher rates of consumption, you pay more. So I forget where the breaking point is, but if the first 28 CCFs that you buy cost $1.77, and then the 29th CCF that you buy costs $3.45 or whatever the number is, and so.
So the idea was to encourage people on their own to conserve.
Well, now this is an interesting question because it seems like that would be the point, but 6 months ago when the original system was passed, it was clarified that this was not actually a goal. It was a side effect, but it was not a goal. The claim was that it literally was, we've calculated out how much it costs to serve you when you use that much water, and these peaks these peaks in usage justify a significantly higher expense.
Now, are there certain times of the day when the expense is higher because it's more in demand?
No, it's actually not about time of day. It's simply the idea that peak use, because there's peak use, the system has to be built to accommodate that. And so, well, we're revisiting this concept basically. We're not revisiting the concept of peak use exactly, but the idea of how much more it should cost. And so one of the things that we are looking at with this, a second look at the water rates is compare like benchmarks. What are other communities doing? How are they setting their rates? Because other communities have tiers. And what does buying 45 CCF look like in Ann Arbor compared to buying 45 CCF in Boulder, Colorado, or whatever the benchmark is? And we're learning a lot by looking at these benchmarks.
So what you're saying is you're still really in the stage of getting information in order to make any further decisions.
Yeah, and we were presented with, I think, 4 pretty specific options. And we have a lot of data now to look at options. And at first it was a little shocking, are we going to pay another $50,000 to look at these water rates again? But I'm really glad that we did, because 6 months ago it was sort of, this is the plan and we're going to sign on it. And now we're saying, okay, well, these are 4 different ideas for a plan. Which one of these is better? Which I really prefer that kind of decision making.
And in the minute we have left, just give us your personal take on what it's like to join this group and be involved in all this work of helping the city be a better city. How's it going for you?
I'm enjoying it a lot. I'm really enjoying all the conversations that I'm having with people. When you're on city council, people are real eager to share what they think with you. And I enjoy that, I really do. And I like the exercise of sharing what I'm thinking and hearing what others are thinking, and that back and forth. Like, that's really a lot of fun for me. I'm enjoying it a lot.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure meeting you and talking with you, and I look forward to seeing you again. And maybe next time we'll have the water rates all figured out.
Yeah, we'll just fix them all.
Great. Remember to join us for a new episode every 3rd Wednesday of the month. We want to hear from you, so please email us at ctn@a2gov.org, attention Ward Talk. You can also follow CTN and ask questions on Twitter at twitter.com/CTN in Arbor. We'll make sure to include your questions. For Ward Talk, I'm Bonnie Gabowitz. Until next month.